Some absolutely incredible examples of prehistoric animals have been discovered frozen in ice as mummified bodies, preserved for thousands of years. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, and saber-toothed cats are just a few of the mind-blowing finds that have melted out of the permafrost in recent years, giving us an unprecedented opportunity to see what these long-lost animals looked like in the flesh. But back in the 1960s, word began to spread about the apparent discovery of what appeared to be some sort of archaic human relative frozen in ice, a creature that has come to be known as the Minnesota Iceman. Many claims have been made regarding this strange discovery, with some saying it's the body of a Neanderthal that survived into modern times, while others suggest it's a kind of missing link in human evolution. Some have even alleged that it could be proof of Bigfoot or the Yeti. The story behind the Minnesota Iceman is both fascinating and rather entertaining, with FBI involvement, tales of the Vietnam War, and claims of interest from the mafia making this one truly bizarre case. Our tale begins, as all good ones do, in New Jersey, specifically New Jersey in December 1968, when the Belgian-French researcher Bernard Heuvelmans was visiting his friend and writer Ivan T. Sanderson, who was living there. Heuvelmans and Sanderson are best remembered today as the so-called Fathers of Cryptozoology, a field dedicated to studying mystery unconfirmed animals, also known as cryptids. Both men published extensively on cryptids throughout their lives, although much of it has since been criticised as being rather unscientific. Nevertheless, it was thanks to these cryptozoological works that Sanderson received a telephone call on the 9th of December 1968 from a man who had been fascinated by his writings on the abominable snowman. This man informed Sanderson of an exhibition he'd seen in August of 1967 at the Wisconsin State Fair. This exhibition displayed a large block of ice that contained within it a hairy humanoid body, which he thought would greatly interest Sanderson, considering its resemblance to the perceived appearance of the cryptid snowmen of the Himalayas. He also explained how he'd been told of the creature's origins, which purportedly had been spotted floating somewhere in the Bering Sea by a Soviet trawler. The captain of the vessel initially thought it might have been a frozen seal, but upon realizing there was a humanoid body inside, they were forced to dock at a Chinese port, where harbour authorities confiscated the entire load of cargo. The body then disappeared for a few months, but later reappeared on the black market in Hong Kong, and it was from here that someone from the States acquired it. 2 days after receiving this call, Sanderson managed to find out the identity of the man displaying the body, and arranged to meet with him so he could look at the specimen. It turned out to be a guy named Frank Hansen, a former pilot in the US Air Force who now worked as a fairground showman, and he was at that time keeping the Iceman at his farm for the off-season, in Rolling Stone, Minnesota. Sanderson didn't waste any time, and after inviting Heuvelmans to join him, they set off on a lad's road trip across the state, leaving New Jersey on the 14th of December and arriving in Minnesota after a long drive on the evening of the 16th. The next day, they came face to face with the Iceman at Hansen's farm. According to Heuvelmans, before they were permitted to see the body itself, Hansen expressed that he didn't want the specimen subjected to a close scientific examination, and was also reluctant for it to receive any publicity that might result from their visit. He also explained that he was not in fact the actual owner of the Iceman. Instead, he claimed he was looking after it for a very wealthy and supposedly rather well-known individual, whom he refused to identify, but who he noted was an agent of the Californian film industry. Rumours have since suggested that the individual he was referring to may have been the actor James Stewart. This is also where the second of the Iceman's conflicting origin stories came to light. You'll be noticing a trend here. Hansen told the cryptozoologist that a Japanese whaling vessel had actually collected the block of ice and legally sold it to a merchant in Hong Kong. It was here that Hansen said he had then bought the Iceman using funds given to him by the mysterious true owner. Anyway, Hansen did indeed allow Sanderson and Heuvelmans to look at the Iceman, and what they observed apparently convinced the pair that they were witnesses to a genuine carcass of some kind of undiscovered primate species. For 3 days, the cryptozoologists closely studied the Iceman, and Heuvelmans took many photos of the specimen. What they described seeing was a large, well-muscled male individual a little over 1.8 meters tall, nearly 6 feet. They described how the proportions were mostly similar to a modern human, with dark brown hair over most of the body, but also patches where skin could be seen, such as on the face, chest, palms of the hands, soles of the feet, and the genital area. The arms were overall proportionally long and would have reached down to the knees, especially as the hands were quite elongate. The chest was bulging and the overall torso was described as barrel-shaped. They noted that the Iceman's face was enormous relative to a person's and disproportionately big compared to the overall skull, occupying most of the head. Protruding eyebrow ridges were obvious, and the nose was said to look more like a snub-nosed monkey's than a human's, being wide and upturned and with 2 large, circular nostrils visible. They also described how the mouth had no lips, and the lower jaw was rounded with no obvious chin projecting out. The thumb drew particular attention too, as it was long, thin, cylindrical, and was not as opposable as ours. The cryptozoologist described the man's hand as looking more like a scythe than pincers, perhaps being suited to collecting grasses or pulling branches towards the mouth. The Iceman also had true nails, not claws. The foot proved to be especially interesting as well. It was large but stubby and had a non-opposable big toe, although it was not much larger than the other toes. The toes also fanned out slightly and bent downwards, and the second and third ones were the longest. Heuvelmans took this to indicate that the Iceman was adapted to a mountainous lifestyle, rather than being a savanna running species like ours, with feet that could have provided good grip on rough terrain. In addition to these anatomical details, the cryptozoologists said that they observed several pathological conditions, injuries, on the Iceman's body, further adding to their conviction that this must have been a real living being. The left arm was raised over the head and was bent along the forearm, and it was claimed that bone could be seen sticking out of an open wound along this part of the limb. The 5th toe on the right foot was also stated to be quite grey, which the cryptozoologists interpreted as an indicator of another wound sustained in life. The eyes were also apparently not in their sockets. The right socket was empty and bloodied, while Heuvelmans reported that the shape of the left eyeball was just visible next to the cheekbone, apparently having fallen out. Moreover, according to Heuvelmans' account of events, the individual who initially called Sanderson about the Iceman stated that he had been shown the back of the head after inquiring about it at the state fair. Therefore, although Heuvelmans and Sanderson themselves did not see the back of the Iceman during their visit, they conveyed what had apparently been observed previously, which was allegedly that the entire back of the skull was bashed in or missing, with brains oozing out. However, much later, the man who informed Sanderson would deny having ever seen the back of the head. Other details of the body that seemed to have convinced the cryptozoologists of its authenticity included the report that from one corner of the case in which the Iceman was kept, there was apparently a broken seal, and from this, there emanated the nauseating smell of a rotting corpse. They could also apparently see the remains of some vegetation between the Iceman's teeth, and reported the presence of what looked to be dead parasites, probably lice, in the hair of the body. This creature was obviously not quite human, possessing a unique mixture of ape-like features. Still, it had enough similarities to humans that the cryptozoologists were sure it was some sort of unknown member of the hominin lineage. More than that, Heuvelmans in particular became convinced that this body was not a prehistoric frozen carcass of a long-dead hominin species, but instead, he was sure this individual must have only been deceased for a few years at most, considering how fresh it still appeared to be. Therefore, he began to construct his own version of events to explain his ideas and the perceived recentness of the Iceman. Bernard Heuvelmans writes in his 1974 book on the Iceman, which received an English translation and some additional material in 2016, that the corpse could not have been found as a block of ice floating in the sea somewhere. The frozen tomb it had been placed in was clearly not naturally formed, and the hairy man must therefore have been put in a freezer to encase it in ice artificially. Heuvelmans suspected that the Iceman had in fact probably been shot, which could explain the missing right eye and the apparently exploded back of the skull. Very quick tangent here, but in the 2016 translation of this book, Heuvelmans explains how the bullet must have gone through the eye and the shockwave must have blown the other eye out of the socket, leaving a large crater at the back of the skull. He then says, one might even be tempted to reenact the crime. Okay Bernard, calm down there. I don't know if this is just an artifact of the translation, but what exactly did he mean by that? Anyway, Vaguely threatening statements aside, Heuvelmans continues to construct his speculative narrative of the actual origins of the Iceman, proposing that the creature had in fact been caught alive after an immobilizing shot to the right leg, remaining captive for some time, and perhaps breaking his arm in an effort to escape. Eventually, according to Heuvelmans, someone must have put the creature down with a shot to the head. He suspected that the original intent of capturing the man was either to sell him to a zoo or to show him at fairs, but after killing him, they decided to freeze the body and make money off him that way. So, in Heuvelmans' view, what exactly was the Iceman? Well, he outright denied that it could have been a fake carcass, as he argued that all the details of tiny hairs, skin pores, wrinkles, veins below the skin, and all the injuries would have been incredibly complicated to create on an artificial body. He also refused the idea that the body could have been stitched together from dead carcasses of several different species. Instead, Heuvelmans considered the best explanation of what the Iceman was to be that he was a modern example of a Neanderthal. He became utterly convinced of it, in fact, writing that Neanderthals have survived to this day. This is one of them. He cited the fact that Neanderthals supposedly only went extinct comparatively recently, about 40,000 years ago, as a reason for this identity as opposed to other more archaic hominin species, and argued that the wide face, sloping forehead, thick brow ridge, robust lower jaw, barrel-shaped chest, and proportions of the limbs were all consistent with what Neanderthals were thought to have looked like. However, he conceded that the Iceman was a bit taller than the estimates for Neanderthal heights, which stood at most about 5'10". As such, he suggested Neanderthals must have evolved greater body sizes over the past few tens of thousands of years. So, after those 3 days spent examining and photographing the Iceman at Hansen's farm in Minnesota, the cryptozoologists were particularly excited about the discovery they'd made. They thought that here, before their very eyes, was undeniable proof that Neanderthals had survived until modern times, and might perhaps explain observations of mystery hominids around the world, such as Bigfoot and the Yeti. Heuvelmans and Sanderson desperately wanted to examine the body more closely, and take samples to prove that it was a real flesh and blood animal. The men inquired with Hansen as to whether, if they could raise enough funds, the anonymous owner would be willing to sell the body, perhaps to a scientific institution or to a wealthy individual who might then allow them better access. Hansen agreed to ask the owner, but later informed the cryptozoologist that he did not want to sell the Iceman for any amount at all. In fact, he also told them that the actual owner had been rather displeased with him for allowing the examination of the specimen, and he was no longer to allow anyone to study it. Despite having reassured Hansen that they would not publish anything on the Iceman, immediately upon their return to New Jersey, both Sanderson and Heuvelmans started to write up their conclusions on the specimen to send off for publication in scientific journals. They even gave the creature a scientific name, agreeing on Homo pongoides, or Homo neanderthalensis pongoides, to designate it as a late surviving Neanderthal. However, as the pair planned their next move over the Christmas and New Year period of 1968 to 1969, it became clear that there were some disagreements between the men. Whereas Heuvelmans wished to convince the scientific world of the Iceman's authenticity, Ivan Sanderson argued that they should take any measure possible to secure the specimen for themselves, whether through offering more money or even by getting the authorities involved. In the end, the pair settled on combining their approaches. While Heuvelmans sought to generate interest from scientists, Sanderson would stand by and be ready to make his move to get at the Iceman by involving whoever he deemed necessary. Naturally, this would all be kept a secret from Frank Hansen. So it was that in January 1969, Heuvelmans submitted a note detailing his observations to the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, and they agreed to publish it within the month. Heuvelmans also got them to agree to keep news of the Iceman from the media until at least March 10th, as he wanted to take Hansen by surprise. At this point, Heuvelmans had left the States, and on January 16th, Hansen himself actually came to visit Ivan Sanderson at his home in New Jersey. Here, Hansen told him that the Iceman's owner had demanded that the body not be analysed further or publicised in articles, And then that's when Sanderson informed the keeper of the Iceman that a scientific journal was about to publish the report by Heuvelmans. Hansen was, according to Heuvelmans' writing, dismayed and furious. But as there was nothing to be done about the impending publication, Hansen didn't see any point in denying Sanderson from publishing his own article on the body, which he later did in the magazine he wrote for, Argosy. During Hansen's visit, Sanderson also further questioned the contrasting origin stories for the body, and Hansen admitted that neither of the stories about it being found floating at sea was true. The ex-pilot stated that he didn't really know where it had originally been found, but that he had heard about it from some old pilot friends who said it was in Hong Kong. So he apparently went there and saw the body where it's being kept in a commercial cold room in a large plastic bag. After going back to the US and locating a wealthy enough person to provide enough funding, he then returned and bought the carcass. But beyond that, he claimed to know nothing else of its provenance. Then another strain was placed on the relationship between the cryptozoologists. The publication of Heuvelmans' note ended up aggravating Sanderson when his own magazine article got delayed. This meant that Sanderson was denied the exclusive report before the media got a hold of the story, and according to Heuvelmans' book, he felt he had been set aside in a secondary role. Heuvelmans even writes of his suspicions that Sanderson was so embittered by this turn of events that he may have started to sabotage their efforts. Heuvelmans also blames Sanderson for some of the incorrect anatomical interpretations that came from his sketches of the body, which Sanderson had apparently drawn from memory several days after viewing the Iceman, and which subsequently became widely shared. Nevertheless, Heuvelmans continued to seek interest from scientists, and, after contacting the primatologist Dr. John R. Napier, managed to attract the involvement of the Smithsonian. A group of researchers at the institution was asked to undertake an autopsy of the Iceman, assuming they could actually access it. However, Hansen had of course been alerted to the upcoming publication of Heuvelmans' report, and had also been informed that it claimed the carcass was that of some sort of human with a gunshot wound. Understandably, that might not look too favourable for him if the report were taken seriously. According to Hansen, the mystery owner had spent about 10 days at his farm and was infuriated by what was occurring. Upon his departure, the owner took the Minnesota Iceman's body with him in a van, but left Hansen with what he claimed was a replica of the corpse. So from then on, it was continuously stated that the original real body had vanished, while the only specimen available to view was an artificial one. The Smithsonian wrote to Hansen asking for access to the body so that they could study it and determine its exact nature, but Hansen relayed to them that the real Iceman was no longer with him. He also said he wasn't sure if the owner would ever allow the real body to be put back on display. Heuvelmans writes in his book that Hansen had even received a visit from the local sheriff around this time, after they apparently got a report that he might have been concealing a human corpse on his property. Nothing much came of this visit. However, it wasn't long until the FBI became involved. After dealing with this refusal from Hansen, the Smithsonian Institute asked the head of the FBI to aid them in finding and potentially seizing the original body. Hansen was questioned further and had more visits from law enforcement. But ultimately, the FBI told the Smithsonian that they could not help without solid proof that a crime had been committed. Following the FBI backing out, Hansen invited various journalists and reporters to come and view the body, which he was now saying was a fake one, at his farm, as he was getting a lot of media attention. It seemed that Hansen was back in the game, and it wasn't long until he started taking the Iceman on the road again. Around this time, John Napier of the Smithsonian was also exploring other possibilities for the Iceman's origin, and near the beginning of May 1969, the Smithsonian received a call from the director of a wax museum, who said that in April 1967, he had overseen the construction of an ape man in foam rubber for Frank D. Hansen. Apparently, they had used bear hair to create its furry appearance. Of course, Heuvelmans claims in his book that this is nothing to be shocked about, as it was merely confirming Hansen's story, that a fake version had been made in case he were to have problems. Although April 1967 would date the construction of this latex model to just before the Iceman started to be shown at fairs, which is more than a little suspicious. Napier, the primatologist, talked to Sanderson about this call, but Sanderson suggested it had simply been a ploy to dampen the Smithsonian's interest in the body, And he even claims that he knew of another model maker who had allegedly created another body for Hansen in April of 1969, right around the time Hansen said the bodies were switched. But then Sanderson also went on to explain how a fake body could be created using taxidermied primate remains, which Heuvelmans says in his book was in a backfiring attempt to prove that the Iceman was genuine. All of this led to Napier and the Smithsonian issuing a statement in May 1969, declaring their conviction that the Minnesota Iceman was nothing but a fairground fabrication made of foam, rubber, and hair. They also stated that, thanks to an anonymous source, they possessed information regarding the owner, as well as the date and place of fabrication. The statement further referenced a discussion with Ivan Sanderson about how a fake body could potentially be constructed, asserting that they were ultimately convinced beyond reasonable doubt that the original model and the alleged current substitute are one and the same. Also in May, Hansen was displaying the Iceman's body to the public again, this time advertising it as a manufactured illusion as investigated by the FBI, and calling it by the original name he'd given it, the Cyberskoya creature. After the body received further publicity once it was back on display to the public, Napier observed that the specimen being exhibited did indeed seem to be different in several aspects from the one that Sanderson and Heuvelmans had inspected initially. These differences were subtle, but included the mouth now being open and showing the teeth, and the big toe being spread further apart. However, in a weirdly contradictory manner, Heuvelmans then began to argue that the corpse being shown to the public by Hansen was in fact not a duplicate body, but still the original one. He suggested that instead of making a copy, Hansen had simply thawed out the Iceman and refrozen him, resulting in the slight differences in positioning. Comparing photos he had been sent of Hansen's new exhibition with the photos he had taken back in December 68, Heuvelmans determined that the ice had been completely refreshed, as certain frosty circles in the original block were no longer present. He noted that certain pigmented spots, imperfections in the skin, and the arrangement of the eyelashes could all be used to confirm that this was the exact same body he'd seen months prior. He dismissed the idea that a second body had ever been made, and argued that Hansen had simply changed the positioning of some parts of the carcass to throw everyone off, by making them look for the original elsewhere when it was in fact right before their eyes. Anyway, Frank Hansen continued to display the Iceman at fairs, and near the start of the 1969 summer season, he decided to take the body into Canada to exhibit it at more fairgrounds. Afterwards, he set out to return to the States but was stopped at the border crossing into North Dakota by US Customs, as he was suspected of carrying some sort of humanoid creature. Hansen again claimed that it was simply a rubber model, but apparently he was asked to allow a sample to be taken from the body to prove this, which he absolutely refused, again saying the true owner wouldn't be pleased that this had been done. Eventually, allegedly after calling the owner and even a senator, Hansen was permitted entry back into the country. This incident led to Hansen again retracting the Iceman from festivals and carnivals for the next few months, but then starting in September he returned once more. And this time he was advertising the creature as a real animal, calling it a missing link and labeling it Homo pongoides. It was around this time that Hansen announced to the media that the true owner had finally decided to allow a scientific analysis of the body. However, it would happen in a laboratory that he would set up himself, where only a few select researchers would be permitted to accompany him. Not much more was mentioned about this development for quite some time, and then, in yet another bizarre turn of events, in July of 1970, Hansen published a magazine article entitled "I Killed the Ape Man Creature of Whiteface." In this article, Hansen shares his confession and recounts his story about the true origin of the Iceman, narrating a gripping tale of his encounter with the creature in the snowy woods of northern Minnesota, where he was responsible for its demise. But this is a story we'll have to save for part 2 of this wild ride. Still to come, we've not only got Hansen's apparent confession, but also Heuvelmans' claims that the Mafia was involved in this entire ordeal, and that the true origin of the Iceman can be traced back to the Vietnam War. Furthermore, we'll be investigating the speculative evolution of Homo pongoides according to Bernard, who explains how the Iceman evolved from its Neanderthal ancestors to look the way it does over the course of 40,000 years, and examining whether any of his claims actually hold up to scrutiny. The bizarre story of the Minnesota Iceman will continue. I really hope you've enjoyed the first part of this story. Please do let me know what you think of it so far in the comments below. Part 2 should be done pretty soon, so keep an eye out for it. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to my other channel, 7 Days of Science. Over on this channel, my co-presenters and I make weekly videos covering all the most fascinating science news of the past week. So if you like a good way to keep up to date with the latest discoveries, you might like what we do over there. We also have a Patreon page where you can support us in return for some fun bonus content. Please do like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and be sure to press that bell icon so you don't miss our next upload. And so you can learn more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all.